Hello, my name is Marisol Rubio. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the San Francisco Bay Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I'm here at Lima Restaurant in Concord, and I have the privilege of being joined today by Dinah Becton, who is running for re-election as our district attorney. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Great. So I'd like to start off with getting a little bit of background about who a little bit about Dinah, who she is, coming up, growing up, and what brought you to public service in this capacity.
I'll start out just as a little girl. I mean, I grew up in a community in East Oakland. I'd never met any lawyers before, but I'm also a child that grew up during the 50s and the 60s and the 70s when there were just so many movements, right? We had the civil rights movement bursting. We had gay rights movement. We had women's rights. We had the Vietnam War. All of these things were sort of happening before us in real time. And I watched as people had dogs put on them and were hosed just because they were trying to get the right to have a seat at the table. And little Ruby Bridges, as she took her steps surrounded by these great big guards trying to have a right to go to the school of her choice. And so all of those things were part of my experiences. And even though I'd never met a lawyer, I quickly came to understand that lawyers were all involved in these movements and that they were not only effectuating changes in court with court cases, they were also very involved in legislation and in terms of changing big systems and things like getting us voting rights later and things like that really had a great impact on our communities. And so it was because of that, watching all of that history unfold in front of me, that I really wanted to become a lawyer.
Wonderful. And specifically, how do you feel that those experiences shaped your worldview and your career, your path?
Sure. Well, I think coming up in a small community, not having been exposed again to lawyers at all, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that we bring all of ourselves with us to the table, right? And so I'm a product of a community where a lot of people thought, they used to say, can anything good come out of East Oakland, right? And so we had those kinds of tags and labels as well. And so all of those experiences, the experiences of the people are with me. I come from a working class family. My father's an aircraft mechanic, and my mother was a self-employed beautician. And so they worked hard to provide for me and for my sisters to make sure that we knew that education was very, very important in our trajectory, and also kind of grounding us in some values about being able to help others and to give back to your community. And so those experiences, along with growing up in my faith community, I remember as a young girl, we had a new pastor come to the church, and he looked around at our desolate community and saw a lot of despair. But he came and told us that we're going to get out of our lazy rocking chairs and we're going to get into this community and make a difference. And I think that J. Alfred Smith Sr. is the pastor who's still involved in my life, and that experience, those words certainly I've held close to my heart and always tried to make sure I'm making a difference in this community, whatever community I'm in.
Right, absolutely. They're very important, those mentors we have along the way growing up. So when you came into office, what was your vision for Contra Costa County, and how has it changed? Is it the same or different from when you started the first time?
I would say the vision is there were lots of things at that time. And when people tapped me, as you all know, the former district attorney, there was a lot of problems within the district attorney's office. People felt like there was a lot of corruption going on there. There were fights in the hallway, sex scandals, all of those things. But at the same time, people in the community also had a sense that there was only a singular lens being used to solve every problem, and that was a lens of incarceration. So when people came to me and urged me to allow my name to be considered for the position when the former district attorney pled to felony charges and resigned, it was because they wanted me to try to do something different. They wanted me to shake up the dynamics of the office. They wanted me to bring greater diversity to the office. And they also wanted me to bring equity and fairness as a lens to the work that we do. And so that's really what I have been trying to do ever since.
And how have those metrics changed in terms of diversity and inclusion?
Actually, they have changed significantly, I like to think. When I came into the office, it was primarily a white office. I don't know how else to say it. It was 82% white, and it was primarily male. So we had, at that time, about 55% of our attorneys were male, and only 40-something percent were female. Very, very small percentage of diversity. I'm really happy now because we now have 55% female. So with our hiring, we've been able to increase the women. I've been able to move women into management positions, supervisory positions in the office. I appointed, well, first of all, I was the first woman. I was the first person of color to serve in this position since the office was established in 1850. And since that time, I have worked hard to increase the diversity. So now we're 55% women. Having the opportunity to build a management team that is actually primarily women. I would say majority women. I mean, it has men and women, but majority women. I also appointed the first female chief of staff in the county's history to a position of that nature. That's number 2 in the office. And then also when she retired, I appointed the first female person of color to be my chief of staff. So we've really made lots of strides. We now have increased the diversity as well so that our office begins to reflect the rich diversity of the community that we serve.
Absolutely, and so important after, as we've seen, the everything that's happened over the past few years, the importance of really bringing to the forefront, addressing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's something that we're still dealing with, So
We're still working on it.
we're still working on it. A lot of work still to do. So, what programs, initiatives have you devised during your first term, and what results have they produced specifically in regards to when we talk about? I know you've talked in the past about providing programs to juveniles over incarceration, and also as well as programs to reduce recidivism rates.
Sure. So, what I've tried to do is really be smart on crime and to make sure that we're using our resources, one, in new and different ways that have been proven in other jurisdictions, but just never utilized in Contra Costa County. Certainly to help reduce our footprint on mass incarceration, but also to have a lens of equity and fairness. So with our youth, I'm very, very pleased that I was able to secure a $1 million grant from the state to develop the very first juvenile justice restorative diversion program for our youth under the age of 18, so that we have an opportunity for them not only to be held accountable when they come into our workload, victim-centered as well, but also to get an assessment and get the services that they need so that they don't recidivate, they don't come back into our system, and that they can be healthy and whole and thrive in our communities going forward. Right. So that's one program that I'm very, very proud of. Yes.
Right. And it sounds like it's almost addressing part of the social deficiencies that may have existed that could have led to those outcomes.
That's a big part of it. Yes, you're
exactly. Right. So is what specific also in terms of being when you talk about reducing recidivism rates, what programs have you devised or are you working on to help formerly incarcerated individuals reintegrate back into society?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we've done, because having old convictions on your record can certainly be it can be a barrier to a person reintegrating and getting into jobs and getting into housing and getting student loans and things that will help them to be more productive in our communities and also to thrive. And so I was able to partner with Code for America. They use technology to make government work better for the people. And it was a blessing to have them. We were the 4th county in Contra Costa County to be, in the state of California, to be adopted by them. So they were able to find when marijuana usage and possession of small amounts of marijuana was no longer illegal. They were able to help us go into our system and find thousands of old convictions so that we could process them and get them submitted to the court, and those cases could be um, dismissed. We affected the lives of over 2,400 people in Contra Costa County who no longer have those barriers and those convictions on their record, and those were primarily people of color. And so they're now cleared up to be able to move forward in their lives in a much more productive way.
Absolutely, very important. So we often talk about stopping the school to prison pipeline. What do you think are some of the causes that are leading to the outcomes that we're seeing, especially among our black and brown communities and children specifically? And what can schools do to improve those circumstances and outcomes that we're observing?
Yeah, what we've been trying to do in Contra Costa is to really partner around, centering our partnerships around um, work and spaces that will allow us to get to the root causes of problems. And that's what the restorative justice program that I just talked about is all about. It's digging into the root causes so that we can address that. And so in Contra Costa, I was very fortunate that we were able to send a team of professionals from not only my office, but also from probation, from law enforcement, from the schools. And we all went to Georgetown University to spend, not Georgetown, I'm sorry, in at the Juvenile Center for Justice in New York, and we were able to spend an intensive week in a program that was actually aimed at reducing those racial disparities that you're talking about. When we came back to the county, our job is to create a program for Contra Costa County that we can present. And so what we decided is we already had this diversion program that I've created, but what about that next step? The first entry level, which is in our schools, because kids who get suspended, who get expelled, and who get arrested on school grounds are already set on a trajectory to enter the juvenile justice system. And what we found is that there are very significant disparities in the population that gets expelled and suspended. So we're working with the schools now to help them to think about implementing a much more restorative justice approach to school discipline and try to reduce the number of kids that actually just get kicked out of school, which leads them on the pathway to, leads them on the pipeline. Yeah.
Right. And in addition to that, I'm assuming probably also high need students who perhaps, if they're not getting adequate support services in the schools or in the communities, are also feeling left out.
Yes. We're also, I also established the Reimagine Youth Justice Task Force, which is another place to engage in these conversations. And we have professionals from, we have doctors, we have lawyers, but we also have our work centered on voices, young people who've actually been through our juvenile halls. A lot of people don't realize this, but as crime has continued to decline, the youth that are in these large facilities in our county are declining. So our Boys Ranch has only an average of about 15 kids at a time now, and our juvenile hall has roughly 50 kids in a 220-bed facility, which means we have a very high cost of housing them, $550,000 per year per child. And so what we're talking about now is how we can come up with different alternatives for those youth safely to at least those who can be safely served on community-based programs so that we can begin to reduce that cost and then also come up with alternatives for more community-based programs so kids don't go into juvenile hall in the first place.
Of course. And so what role, if any, do you feel that law enforcement should have in schools?
Well, I think everything that we have to do, that we do in this work should be it should be centered on community safety. And so I think we have to work with our school districts, we have to work with parents, and we have to work with youth so that no matter what the issue is, no matter what the concern is, it is always centered, the conversation is always centered on how do we keep our kids, how do we keep our schools safe.
And how do you think we can create a more positive relationship, and especially when you have those encounters between young people and communities of color and law enforcement? What can we do?
Part of it is that we're often operating in silos, right? And so I have sponsored programs in our community. One of them was called Know Your Rights, that we sponsored in our faith community just for kids to get to know how to handle themselves safely when they have encounters with law enforcement. We've had some amazing events, because not only are we teaching young people how to interact, when they're free to leave, or when they're in custody, so that they can have safe interactions with law enforcement, but then we also had small group conversations so that our kids and law enforcement could actually have a dialogue with each other and hear each other and learn the needs of each other and begin to open up those lines of communication. So that's one of the ways that we've approached that issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. Opening that, like as you said, those lines of communication in other contexts, not only when there is a problem,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And and obviously helping also young people perhaps understand socially, uh, how to cope with those feelings, those inevitability of things that we're seeing happening in society, where we are seeing some police officers who unfortunately are carrying some implicit bias, or and dealing with the reality of what they have to consider, even if they have a simple being pulled over, for example.
Yes.
These are considerations that truly are almost exclusive, not as solely, but very leaning towards impacting communities of color, particularly our Black community and subsequently our
Yes.
brown community.
That's absolutely right.
So, what do you think we can do in terms of helping our law enforcement, on the other hand, being better equipped and able to manage those interactions on their end?
I think it's similar to what we've done in the district attorney's office. Is so much of it is training and also exposure, right? Cultural sensitivity training, so that we learn about other cultures and what their needs and what their concerns are. Also, training that we've brought, for example, into the DA's office for implicit bias, because all of us have biases, and we need to make sure that we understand when they show up and where they show up and how to manage them, so that when we're going about our day-to-day activities, we're not allowing our biases to influence our decision making. So I think training is a huge part of the solution.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Thank you so much for all the great work you're doing, evidently. With the snatch and grab incident that happened in Walnut Creek, obviously left a lot of small businesses in particular who don't have as much, I should say, buffers to recover from an incident like that. A little nervous. So, what are some of the measures you think we can take to try to prevent another incident like that? And what role does law enforcement have with small businesses, working with small businesses in the community?
Great question, because the one thing that we all want is to feel safe in our communities. We want to feel safe in our homes. We want to feel safe in our communities, and we want to feel that it's okay. We can go shopping, for example, and still be safe. And with the smash and grabs, I mean, the big one, of course, is where we had 90 people storm the Walnut Creek Nordstrom store, all simultaneously going into 3 separate entrances all at once, grabbing stuff, harming some of the employees, and then all exiting at once. And of course, in that moment, law enforcement was not able to apprehend all of them, but they did get a few. And for those that were caught by law enforcement, they were brought into our office, their paperwork, so that we could charge them. They've all been charged with serious felony crimes, including organized retail theft. and robbery, and they are making those cases are making their way through the system. We wanted to act swiftly because we wanted to send a clear message to our community that these types of smash and grab crimes will not be tolerated. The other thing that I did was we recognized among the district attorney offices around California that the people who are committing these crimes are organized, and therefore we need to be organized as well. So I immediately partnered with 6 district attorney offices all the way from San Joaquin to Santa Clara, Alameda, San Mateo, and we all are working together on this issue, even the Attorney General, and we are discussing the best techniques and prosecutorial pathways. But in addition to that, we're also partnered with federal and state and local law enforcement as we're all in a discussion about how do we prevent these crimes and what our response should be so that we keep our communities safe. We also have communication with small businesses so that they know because a lot of times these crimes can also be crimes of opportunity, and we want our businesses to be prepared and on the lookout and know what to do in terms of having some tips so that we are helping them that way. And then finally, I'm working with our legislators as well because sometimes the goods that are taken are often sold online, so we are working on legislation that will tighten up the requirements and the disclosure about people selling these goods online. So all fronts are working to be able to attack this problem and keep our communities safe.
Sounds like a very comprehensive effort and a lot of people working collaboratively, which is great.
I think that's the key is the collaboration among our offices. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, congratulations on getting the East Bay Times endorsement. Obviously, there's something, they chose you for a reason. So, this being a very competitive race, what does your electorate need to know about how you are different than your opponent and why you are their best choice?
I think several things, and there's so many things that we've done that I have not yet touched on that are really not only helping victims of crime, but also bringing a lens of equity and fairness to this work. I didn't get to mention, Marisol, that our sexual assault test kits are all up to date in Contra Costa County, and I've worked with law enforcement to make sure that we have a tracking system in place so that they don't get behind again. But I think another major difference, and this was pointed out by the East Bay Times, is my approach to accountability, and not just holding people accountable, some people accountable, but everyone, no matter whether you are a priest or whether you're in law enforcement or whether you're an elected official, those who abuse their power, we are holding them accountable. And I think that's one significant difference. You know that we recently prosecuted the officer who took the life of a mentally ill man, shot him 9 times. A jury convicted. A judge gave a lengthy record about why she felt that a sentence was appropriate to go to prison. And of course, I have now been attacked for even bringing that case. But I think that really distinguishes me. As you will look at our filings, you will see that law enforcement is pumping tons of money, thousands and thousands of dollars into my opponent's coffers. And I have pledged for many years that I do not accept law enforcement union money. And I think it's a clear conflict of interest because, one, we have to work with law enforcement hand in hand every day. That is how we do our work. It's how we prosecute cases, right? But at the same time, when I have to investigate cases and hold them responsible, the unions are the ones that are paying for their defense. And so I draw a clear line there, and that's a huge distinction between myself and my opponent, is that I will not take those dollars from the unions because I think it's a clear conflict of interest for a district attorney, especially in an election season, to do so. In addition to that, I am doing the work to not only be tough on crime. I co-lead the FBI Safe Streets Task Force, where we concentrate on those who are committing violence in our communities using guns and using gangs. I have also establish a hate crimes committee and a cold case unit so that we go back and look at old unsolved murders. Just the other day, we were able to hold a press conference, a 22-year-old unsolved case that we were able to bring some closure to that family about who took the life of their loved one. So we are working on things to be tough on crime, but we're also being smart on crime and making sure that those who have addiction, drug addictions, and mental illness, that we're trying to get them into services and into treatment as opposed to bringing them into the criminal justice system. So my approach, I'm getting away from that old approach of a singular lens of incarceration for everyone and really trying to have a system that is fair and just for everyone and that brings solutions to some very difficult problems in our community.
So I understand that you were also a judge. What were some of the professional experiences that led you into the district attorney's office?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of serving Contra Costa County as a judge for 22 years. And during that time, I was elected as the presiding judge of the court, which means I was over the entire court and a $54 million budget. And that really sets me apart because it gives me for most of my career, I even previous to that was involved in management and supervision. And so I have a wealth of experience about how to run a large organization like the district attorney's office. I was also elected during that time as the president of the National Association of Women Judges, which is the nation's leading voice for women in the judiciary. And I currently serve on several committees at the pleasure of the governor. I am on the state of California's Victims Compensation Board. So I make sure that victims of crime in California can get fair and just resources and compensation. And then I also serve on the Judicial Selection Advisory Committee. It gives me an opportunity to vet on behalf of the governors those who want to become judges in Northern California. So when I was a judge, I had very challenging assignments in both criminal and civil. I handled consumer cases, environmental cases. I supervised the civil division as well as the felony criminal calendar division where all the plea bargains are made. So I would say all of that experience really uniquely suits me to sit in this chair as the district attorney.
Lots of experience coming in. Wonderful. So it sounds like you're really taking that next level of community-led law enforcement and safety, public safety. I guess goes in line with reimagining public safety as a community effort rather than any single person or entity.
Yes.
It's wonderful, wonderful. So how can voters learn more about you or reach out to you if they have any questions?
Well, the first place to reach out to me would be on my wonderful website. It is simply at dinabecton.com, DIANABECTON.com. And there's a wealth of information there about not only the work that I have already done, but some of my plans for the future. And so please visit that website. You'll also be able to see all of my wonderful endorsements in this race, so including the East Bay Times, but also being blessed to have the support of all of our congressmen, our state leaders like Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, Buffy Wicks, State Senator Nancy Skinner. We have justice leaders behind us. We have labor leaders behind us, transportation leaders, environmental leaders. So much overwhelming support from our community. And so I believe that I truly am the people's candidate. I work for the people, and I would be proud to earn your support.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, District Attorney Becton, for all the work you've been doing, and we look forward to possibly another term here. Thank you. And thank you for joining us.